Chapter 12. A surprising discovery. In the darkness, it was not easy for Nancy to distinguish objects, but she dimly saw the back of a man. He disappeared around a corner of the house. By the time she reached the spot, he had vanished. Now, where did he go so quickly? She asked herself, perplexed. She listened for footsteps, but could hear none. He must have gone into the house, she speculated excitedly. But where? Cautiously, she circled the old mansion, looking at each darkened window for a telltale light. None appeared. If that man is in the house, he must know his way around in the dark, Nancy thought. I must warn the others. She hurriedly went inside. Nancy spoke first to Bess and George, who were still in the kitchen. There's a prowler around, she said breathlessly. Will you please post yourselves outdoors and yell if you see him leave the house? Where are you going? George asked. To the attic. Not alone, Bess quavered. I'll get Mr. March. The elderly man was considerably upset by Nancy's announcement. After making sure that Susan was all right, they tiptoed to the attic door. Quietly, Mr. March opened it. As he did so, creaking sounds came from overhead. This was followed by the same harp-like notes Nancy had heard once before. There was no sign of a light above them. Nancy and Mr. March waited. Complete silence. The stillness was broken by Susan. Afraid, the child had come into the hall. Seeing the listening figures, she sped toward them, crying. What's the matter? Why are you going up to the attic? She asked in a loud voice. For a second, Nancy was distressed that the child had unwittingly alerted whoever was in the attic. Suddenly, it occurred to her that she might put Susan's questions to good use. She said in a loud voice, Get into bed, dear, and we'll tell you a story. She motioned to Mr. March to take the little girl away. Nancy lighted the candle she was holding and noiselessly stepped to the stairway. She closed the door behind her with a bang. If someone is in the attic, I hope he thinks I went the other way, she reflected. For several minutes she stood still. No light appeared above her. There were no sounds except the murmur of Mr. March's voice as he sought to calm Susan with a story. Finally, Nancy inched her way up the stairway, testing each step for creaky spots before putting her weight on it. Reaching the top step, she held the candle at arm's length. Quickly, she scanned the entire attic. No one here now, she decided. She sniffed suddenly. Smoke! Nancy's heart leaped wildly. Was the place on fire? She sniffed again. No, not a fire, but someone had been smoking recently in the attic. At that instant, Mr. March called up sharply. Nancy! Yes? Are you all right? Yes, I didn't find anyone here. The elderly man started up the stairs. I had no idea you were going to the attic alone, he said. I thought you would wait until I could get back. Before Nancy had a chance to reply, they heard a shout from the garden. Bess and George must have seen the man, Nancy cried, hurrying down the steps. She raced all the way to the front door. Her friends were running through the pine grove toward the main road. Nancy took after them as fast as she could. The chase ended abruptly a short distance from the road when they heard a motor start and saw a red taillight disappear around a bend. Their quarry had apparently jumped into a car and driven off. If that isn't the worst luck, George cried. We almost had him. It's a shame, said Nancy. Did you get a look at him?" "No, it was too dark," Bess replied. "He seemed to sneak out of nowhere so unexpectedly." "He was carrying a rolled paper in his right hand," George reported. "Did he come from the house?" Nancy asked. "We don't know. All of a sudden, there he was, just ahead of us. When George yelled, he started to run." Mr. March met the girls at the front door. He had wanted to help in the chase, but the excitement had frightened Susan again, and it seemed wiser to stay with her. It took Nancy a while to quiet the little girl, but soon her eyelids closed, and she fell into a sound sleep. Nancy tiptoed to the hall and went downstairs. In the living room, Bess had turned on the radio to restore her courage so she would dare to stay in the spooky old house. Mr. March suddenly jumped up from his chair. "They've done it again!" he cried. "Done what?" Bess asked. Before he could reply, the music died away. The announcer's voice was clear and crisp. Nancy fully expected to hear the name Ben Banks. Therefore, she was startled at what she did hear. "You have just listened to a new composition by Harry Hall. This completes the program of the Magic Hour. Listen in again tomorrow at the same time." Mr. March angrily snapped off the switch. "I'll do more than listen," he fumed. "Harry Hall, indeed. My son wrote that, every note of it. If I can only scrape together a few dollars, I'll take the case to court." Then, remembering that he had no evidence to support his case, he sat down utterly dejected. Nancy tried to encourage him. "Is there anyone besides your family who heard Phipp play the songs? Anyone who might positively identify him as the composer?" Mr. March shook his head. "There's no one I know of," he admitted. "Mrs. Peabody used to come to the house to hear Phipp play the piano, but she died last year." "Didn't Phipp have any younger friends?" "Plenty of them, but they've scattered to the far corners of the earth. I wouldn't know where to find them." Nancy tried a different approach. "Are you certain that your son never sold any of his tunes?" "Phipp wouldn't sell his music. He composed it because he loved to. I'm sure he would have told his wife Connie if he had sold any of his songs." Although she did not suggest it to Mr. March, Nancy was afraid another piece of music had been stolen from the attic that very evening. As the three girls were getting ready for bed, Nancy told her friends about smelling smoke on the third floor. Then she asked, "Are you sure you saw a rolled paper in the hand of the man we were chasing?" The girls nodded. "Do you think it was a sheet of music?" Bess asked. "I'm afraid so," Nancy replied. "There's no telling how long thieving may have been going on here. Well, if I can't locate the music, perhaps I can find a clue to the thief right in this house." "How?" George asked. "I have an idea. We'll try it out in the morning," said Nancy. Pressed by her friends for an explanation, she revealed her suspicion that there might be a secret entrance to the attic. "And you think that's how our thief got out?" Bess queried. "I'm convinced of it. Mr. March and I both heard the floor creak, and I know someone was smoking." As soon as Effie arrived in the morning to take over the housekeeping duties, Nancy and her friends went outdoors to examine the old mansion for signs of a concealed entrance. "Hunt for clapboards that can be moved," Nancy directed. "Secret doors alongside real ones. False windows. Hidden—" "That's enough to start with," George laughed. The girls separated. They inspected every inch of the foundation and first floor walls. Nancy spent a long time in the old servants' quarters to see if there might be any kind of a concealed opening into the main part of the house. None of the girls found one. "There's only one thing left for us to do," said Nancy. "Hide in the bushes tonight and spy on the intruder." "What do we do in the meantime? Get some sleep?" George asked. "I propose we go up to the attic and hunt for a hidden entrance," Nancy declared. "We'll have to take a candle. I haven't had a chance to get a new battery for my flashlight." The three friends trooped to the third floor. "I once heard rapping sounds up here," said Nancy. "Maybe there's a secret panel that has to be knocked on in order to make it open." Bess stayed close to Nancy as she began rapping her knuckles against the low walls under the sloping roof. George decided to look through an old bureau. Remembering that Mr. March needed money, she kept her eyes open for saleable articles. "Here's some beautiful lace," she called out, taking it from the drawer. "Let's see," Bess cried. George held up several dainty pieces. "Old lace is valuable," she declared. "Someone who appreciates beautiful things will pay Mr. March a good price for this lovely work." "Have you anyone in mind?" Bess asked. "Yes," George replied. "Madame Perret, the dressmaker. Maybe she'll put some of it on a dress for Diane Dite." George grinned. At that instant, Bess screamed, "Oh, take it away!" She stood as if transfixed. The girl had backed up toward the wardrobe, and the door had swung open. The long, bony fingers of the skeleton had enmeshed themselves in her hair. Quickly, George released its hold. Bess sank shaking onto a trunk. "See the way that skeleton hangs there, with its back against the rear of the wardrobe and the other bony arm half upraised?" Bess pointed out, "just as if it were beckoning us to come into the closet." "Why, so it does," Nancy agreed. She moved closer to the wardrobe. Perhaps Phip March placed the skeleton that way to convey a message to his family. Possibly there's a secret hiding place. "Oh, Nancy, close the door," Bess urged. While Bess looked on with disapproval, Nancy began an examination of the massive wardrobe. She had done so before, but this time the young detective paid particular attention to the section underneath the skeleton. Inch by inch, she ran her hand over the floor of the big piece of furniture. "Hold the candle, George," she requested. The other girl came closer. "I can feel something with my fingers," Nancy said in an excited voice. "It's a tiny knob," she cried. "Girls, I found a secret compartment." Again and again she tugged, trying to pull it up. The wood had swollen from dampness, and the lid was stuck fast. "Let me try my luck," George urged impatiently. Before she could test her strength, Effie appeared at the head of the stairs. "Miss Nancy, there's a man downstairs to see you," she announced. "To see me? I didn't think anyone knew I was here." "Mrs. Gruen sent him," Effie explained, "and he says he can't wait long." "What's his name?" "Mr. Jenner." The publisher of Ben Banks' music. End of chapter 12.